Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a map, pointed to a really specific geographical landmark, and just wondered, how on earth did it get that name? Well, today we are unraveling a genuinely fascinating geographic mystery from the Manggarai people. It's the legend of a very real place that bears the name of a man whose own community completely turned against him, tied him up, and threw him into a seemingly bottomless pit. It is an absolutely wild story of survival, betrayal, and ultimately human nature. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp the weight of this story, we first need to understand the language and the setting. The term Lanka is actually the Manggarai word for whole, and this entire legend is rooted deeply in a remote village located in the Lambaleta subdistrict, way back in the past. We're talking about a time when survival completely depended on the land, and the wild, untamed spaces around a village held immense power and mystery. And that brings us to the man at the very center of our mystery, Ama Nina. Now, what's crucial to understand here is that Ama Nina wasn't his actual birth name. It translates to Nina's father. This is just a really beautiful, traditional Manggaraya naming convention. When a man gets married and has kids, he's typically addressed by the name of his eldest child. His eldest was named Nina, so he became Ama Nina. And this detail is so important because it immediately grounds him in his community. He wasn't some lone wanderer, right? He was a family man, deeply embedded in the social fabric of his village. But, as you'll see, this is exactly where the friction begins. Ima Nina was an absolutely exceptional hunter. I mean, the guy was a legend in his own right, particularly when it came to setting snares. Literally, almost every single time he stepped foot into the forest, he came back with a wild boar. His skills were just staggering. But despite this massive abundance, he was an extreme miser. He was famously exceptionally stingy. He never shared his catch, not with his closest neighbors, not with the wider village. He kept every single scrap of his massive hauls entirely to himself. And that leads us to a pretty fundamental psychological truth. Individual success, when it's hoarded like that, breeds profound communal resentment. You can definitely imagine the human frustration here, right? We've all dealt with selfish people. But in a close-knit village where resources are shared and community bonds mean literally everything, Ima Nina's extreme greed wasn't just annoying, it was deeply offensive. The villagers were watching him feast while they had absolutely nothing. And over time, that frustration calcified into pure hatred. Now, what's really interesting about this is how quickly that resentment escalated into a dark, highly pragmatic conspiracy. The villagers didn't just gossip behind his back, they actually held a meeting. And during that gathering, a chilling question was put on the table. How can we kill this miser? It is such a dark shift. The community essentially decided that Imo Nina's selfishness was a cancer and it needed to be surgically removed from their village. So they hatched this cold, incredibly calculated plan. First, they'd lure him out of the safety of his house by inviting him to do what he loved most, hunting. Then they'd wait until he inevitably caught a boar and simply ask him for some meat, fully expecting him to say no. They would then use that exact refusal as their justification to ambush him, tie him up, and finally throw him into a massive, treacherous hole out in the middle of the forest and just leave him for dead. It was a trap built entirely around his own predictable greed. So picture this. The tense standoff happens in the forest exactly as they planned. Ima and Nina catches a boar almost immediately. The villagers step up and ask for a share, and what happens next is a fatal clash of logic. Ima Nina tells them, flat out, I can't do that. I'm the one who caught this wild boar, so I won't share it. It belongs to me. And to the villagers, this refusal is the final straw. Their logic is brutal but simple. You refuse to share, so we will eliminate you. The betrayal is swift, and it is violent. The men who had accompanied him, men he knew, men he had lived alongside his whole life, suddenly tackle him. They bind his arms and legs tight with heavy rope. They drag him through the dense foliage right to the edge of this massive, gaping hole in the forest floor. And without a second thought, they throw him in. He is swallowed by the earth, plunging straight into the darkness. To the villagers walking away, the problem of the miser was permanently solved. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive twist of our folktale. The villagers thought they were throwing him into a grave, right? But that hole wasn't an ordinary pit at all. It was actually the entrance to a long, sprawling underground passageway. We're talking about a massive, hidden tunnel system that snaked its way deep beneath the earth, leading miles and miles away, all the way to a region called Dampek. His incredible journey of survival kicks off in minute 1, hitting the bottom in total darkness. But within the first hour, instead of just giving up, he manages to find a sharp rock in the pitch black. With immense effort, he literally rubs the thick ropes binding him against the stone until they finally fray and snap. Now free, he begins this terrifying blind march through a completely unlit subterranean tunnel. After hours and hours in the abyss, he finally sees a sliver of light on day 2, emerging at last at a place called Laying Low. Now you might be wondering, why didn't he just climb back up the hole once he untied himself? Well, Nina had this chilling realization down in the dark. He thought, if I go back up, they'll definitely kill me again. I'd better keep following this tunnel to the end. It is such a profound, terrifying moment of realization. The people he trusted had entirely turned on him. Going back was a death sentence. The only way left for him was deeper into the dark, unknown earth. But that leap of faith actually pays off. Nina emerges from the tunnel, completely exhausted, weak, and just covered in dirt. He comes out at Laying Low, in the village of Nangalirang. Now, here's a really fascinating historical note for you. This specific location in Dompak is actually entirely submerged by seawater today. No way, right? But back then, the local residents saw this man literally crawl out of the earth, and they immediately rushed to his aid. And as they nursed him back to health, he recounted this entire horrific story of his betrayal to his new rescuers. Nina ended up living safely in Nangalirang for quite some time, but, the pull of home is strong. Eventually, he made the brave decision to attempt the long overland journey back to his hometown. But sadly, it was a journey cut short. As the legend goes, Nina passed away on the road before he could ever make it back to his village to confront the people who had wronged him. Let's move on and see how this builds, because while the man died, his story absolutely did not. The residents of Nangalirang passed his incredible tale of survival down from generation to generation, telling it to their children and their grandchildren. And to this very day, that fateful, treacherous hole in the forest where he was betrayed and thrown away bears his name, Langka Manina, the hole of Imanina. Like all great folktales, this one carries a heavy, timeless moral weight that the Manggarai people still reflect on today. It's essentially a story of balance. You've got Amanina's greed and refusal to share on one side, which directly results in inevitable hatred and suffering on the other. The legend serves as a pretty stark reminder that a community simply cannot survive when its members operate with pure selfishness. Hoarding your blessings ultimately leads to your own downfall. So, what does this all mean for us? This ancient myth challenges us to look a bit deeper, leaving us with a final question to ponder. In a world that so heavily celebrates individual success, are you sharing your catch with your community, or are you out there digging your own Lanka? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the stories hidden all around us. See you next time.